Hi, I'm Dr. D, the Mindset Doc. I'm so excited to bring to you today a unique and different kind of perspective about decoding the conflict mindset. Today, Kimberly joins me. What's unique about her is that, well, she is a mediator, yes, but she comes to us from an extensive nursing background in healthcare. And so she has really unique insight into what people go through, particularly as we're nearing the end of life. And the mindset that goes into how do we make it better, not only for ourselves in that journey, but also for those who are left behind us. So what Kimberly brings to us is her insights on how to prepare people as they near the end of their life and what to do about it. Isn't that something we all have to deal with? So come on, listen and learn with Dr. D, the Mindset Doc, and Kimberly Best. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you, Debra. Good to be here.
Thank you. Well, I am excited to explore your message. We've talked before as far as, how life and death affect us. And I've had my own personal story and journey. But our topic today is really about how to live forever. What's that mean? Well, it's a guide to writing that final chapter of your life story. And so you've got a powerful message, and I'm excited to bring that to our listeners and viewers, particularly to our world of dispute resolution enthusiasts as they work with families through difficult times. And so, Kimberly, I have lots to say about your background, which is exciting. But I know that you have a foundation for people to live well in their time they have, to leave their stories behind as their legacies, and to die well by having their final wishes honored. And so I know you've produced a book, and we'll get more into that. I'm curious, I know that you are active on the Tennessee Board Association for Professional Mediators, member of Mediators Beyond Borders International. That's a whole other story there. Also with the Association for Conflict Resolution Elder Care Development Committee and the American Bar Association Membership Committee member. So you are active and contributing to your field, not just to the communities you serve. And so that's wonderful. I'm curious, Kimberly, what put you in this direction? What prompted you to go into this area that a lot of people don't know about?
Yeah, and you're right. A lot of people don't know about it. That's probably a huge part of my passion. So I was a registered nurse for most of my life. I still am a registered nurse. I worked in every ICU there is. I worked in trauma and finally emergency department. And inside of that, seeing people struggle and have to make difficult decisions without having put thought into how to make those decisions before. I transitioned into graduate school in psychology somewhere, just more or less out of burnout, but also because beside the physical part of people, I was pretty passionate about what makes us tick. And life is hard sometimes, and how can we do that better? And so moving through that back into nursing again, I finally went through a divorce that was awful. For me, it was not just life changing. It was a rebuilding from the start. And a lot of times things like divorce come down to two good people really struggling who haven't learned how to deal with conflict. So my brother's an educator, and he said, I heard about this thing at Hofstra called transformative mediation. Maybe you could just go check that out. So that introduced me to mediation. And I kind of got a little obsessed with the fact that we don't know how to do conflict. And if we can learn how to do it better, I believe it can change the world. And I believe it's one person at a time. So whatever that conflict is. And then, of course, my book, How to Live Forever, it combined a lot of conflict that face us as we make decisions about the end of our lives, from healthcare, from legal decisions, most importantly, relationships, because it turns out in our lives, those are the things that matter way more than how well our will is done. And talking about conflict as well. And all of that combined, because what I learned in nursing from the very first person that I sat with as she died, I sat beside this woman holding her hand, and I thought, this is her story. I'm watching the final cover close on her story. And I wondered what people didn't know. I wondered her secrets, her joys, her lessons, and all this is lying there in a minute. And that never left my nursing career, the concept that we are living our story. And if we're purposeful in deciding how we want to write that all the way to the end, then I think we can mitigate for regret and leave a legacy, not only of ourselves, but that extends into generations, that we learn from, that we remember, that we can hold in a place that's peaceful, and just continue to grow together instead of apart. So it came from a heart of peace. The short story is, I believe most mediators, I believe it's a peacemaker. I believe there's lots of places to do that. We need it almost every moment in our lives. And yeah, I have a passion for promoting how to do that better versus how to fight.
Yeah. Because fighting takes a lot of energy. And it
just escalates. Yeah. You can't find resolution that way. You can't find resolution. And we can. I tell people, we're either working really hard on the front end so that the back end is easier, or we sweep aside the work that we need to do and we accrue a trash pile. And that pile can get so big that we can't dig through it. And it's mostly because we haven't learned how. I mean, it's not because we're bad people. I mean, we could talk about triggers and, our biological responses to conflict. We have all those, but we need the skills and tools to go beyond that so that we can bring our best thinking self forward when times get tough.
Absolutely. Given my line of work as a psychologist, as well as a mediator, because it was really mediation that got me into this whole body of study that I, embraced and use all the time in my work. But that, some people are naturally conflict avoidant. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people or good people or, but they, conflict is really a painful experience for them. And then other people are very conflict embracing, as I like to call it. They just go after it and have no problem challenging others when it comes to conflict. And so by recognizing these natural tendencies of ours, as you've already said, it is about building skills and strategies for how to manage it, because conflict in and of itself is not a bad thing. A lot of good can come out of conflict, but it's knowing how to manage it that is really the key to any dispute, any difference, any divergent perspective that may exist. And so that's where I love bringing the neuroscience into the picture, because you talk about what triggers us. And again, we are naturally triggered by lots of external stimuli, but unless we sort of know and own our own response pattern, we can just go off there and be hard to reel back in then, so yeah. So I really appreciate with your background then what you brought to the understanding of people in conflict as well, and how that shaped your pathway. And our life stories, like your own with divorce, and my own with divorce, as well as the death of I come from a large family, and so we've lost 5 of my siblings, and including my mom and my dad, and so it's been a tough 10 years, shall we say, and that will shape us. And so, carrying people's stories on is a way of celebrating their legacy, and helping people get that out is really critically important. I'm wondering, Kimberly, when you think about, I want to say something before that really ties into what you just said, is that Dr. Benjamin Hardy, I had the good fortune of being part of a workshop with him a couple of months back, but he had this saying, and I may not get it just right, but our vision of the future is what shapes our present time, and yet what our vision for the future is defined by what we do today as well. And so that's really what I think you're talking about when you talk about writing that final chapter. So when you think about your book, What could you tell us in terms of three main highlights that you really want, our listeners and viewers to, capture from all the time and energy you put into your life's work?
Yeah. So I want to empower people. I think we have at least two major systems at play in making these decisions. We have the medical field and the legal field. Mm-hmm. And then the third one is our own personal relationships and families, right? And I, as a nurse from the nursing end, I know it's difficult to talk about. Well, let's talk about COVID now. I'll use that for an example. A lot of people, when COVID started and we found out how fatal it was, were, well, if I get sick, I'll just go on a ventilator, and thinking that was a cure, right? But that's a really painful, difficult procedure. That means you're literally at the end of your life when they're putting you on a ventilator, and you're paralyzed and sedated in order so this machine can breathe for you. But my point being that understanding the consequences that we're paying in order to live longer versus making a decision to live better. So the empowerment is around, what are my choices in healthcare? How do I want to live? Not just to live longer, but to live well. I think for a lot of times I experience, and we still hear stories of that, people, I say, sort of act like we're cars showing up to a mechanic when we go to the hospital, and we'll just get fixed and leave again. And that's not the case. We are mortal, and we will age, and we will die, and we won't be able to get fixed. And that's not a failure of the healthcare system. That's not punishment for eating bacon or for living your lifestyle wrong. It just is. So that if we can recognize that and make decisions on our healthcare, knowing how we want to live and how we want to die, right? So that we take responsibility in making our healthcare decisions rather than the healthcare system itself. So I always recommend, in addition to my book, there's a book by Atul Gawande called it's called Being Mortal. And it is a wonderful book that describes what the healthcare system can truly do, not ideally do, but truly do, as well as how the aging system, how we age and what happens naturally to our bodies. Mm-hmm. And when we understand this again, I think, and can accept that this is a normal part of living, we can make realistic decisions that aren't left for our family to decide for us, number one, or healthcare providers to decide for us. So asking good questions around healthcare and deciding what you want the end of your life to look like, given the treatment options, whether you want to take them or not. Because being alive longer is not the same as being alive well. And I think we have to differentiate that. The second thing is around the legal decisions, to make sure that you have in place what you want. And that, I think, requires conversations. I hear more and more attorneys say, family surprised, they didn't know somebody got this or was this decision maker. Having these conversations with family. And the third thing, the most important thing, I think, is the power of mediation to help make all of these decisions, even with relationship decisions, anything around conflict in families. Mediation can help facilitate difficult discussions. We're supposed to, and empower the families and you to come up with the decisions that work for you. And the most beautiful thing, I think, for me, I find the reluctance to join mediation is a fear of blame. It's not about whose fault it is or who's right or wrong. It's about designing the future the way we want it to look. So that's what I want to come through in the book.
Okay, great. So moving backwards then is the power of mediation to help families through these difficult life and death choices and pathways to get to there, because there is a beginning and there is a middle and there is an end. But then also being realistic about your legal options and having it defined as far as how you want it to carry out. And then two is just being realistic about the the capabilities of the medical system and again the natural process of aging and what that means, and then also, like you said, not the longevity but the quality of life along the way.
Right. Yeah. And Debra, when I was writing my book, I interviewed some hospice chaplains, and one of them told me in his institution, he estimated that 50% of the dying clients had family estrangement to the point of dying alone. Right. So healing relationships to the extent that we want them to be, there's a whole line of mediation with family estrangement mediation now, which I find fascinating because, again, it comes back to learning the conflict tools so that we have an option other than we're not in relationship anymore. Yeah. And we make that possible in mediation, at least to provide other options besides that, because there's a point where it's too late to fix, and that's where regret is. Yeah. And again, I really hope to mitigate for that regret so that we can have peace.
Yes. Yeah. You brought up hospice, and unfortunately, however you want to look at it, but I have had a few experiences with hospice and coming in for care, family members towards the end. And I remember going to the point, it was difficult for me being a mediator and being involved in some family elder care and other family issues. But my youngest brother was dying. And of course, his wife, my sister-in-law, had a very different view of how things were unfolding. And being the only family member directly in the community, it was bewildering to me. And we did have somebody step in to facilitate a dialogue, and it made me just realize how rampant the emotions are, how skewed our cognitive perceptions can become distorted, and just the fact that we are different people and we're going to see things differently, and the power. This wasn't really a mediation, but it was a facilitator of the dialogue, and so it was pretty amazing, the perspectives that unfolded from that, and but did help tremendously in sort of repairing the rift that had emerged, because unfortunately he had a protracted illness in 17 months, so over a year and a half of going through these very difficult times, and so it's and I wasn't aware, quite frankly, of the figure you talked about with the family estrangement, which brings to my mind a friend who I hadn't really seen for a couple of years, but I had become aware that he had become ill. And yes, he was estranged from all of his kids, his 4 adult kids, although one had come back into his life. And so here I am in the community and had to learn from somebody else that he did in fact pass away a few months ago, because I didn't know anybody to contact because he was so estranged from family. So yeah, it's an important arena to try to heal people through and guide people through, and so with that, who. I mean, I think we sort of have defined who does this book help, but families with people who want to plan for their futures. So say more about that in terms of just what people get out of this kind of approach to looking at their final chapter.
Well, I think for me, the premise that our life is our story, right? And that we are empowered to write that story, who we are. Like, we can't control the circumstances of our lives, but we can control how we show up in those circumstances. And in order to do that, I talk about the end of life issues as being the final frontier of the taboo subjects that we don't really talk about. But we all know people who've died young. And I tell some of their stories in the book as well, because we don't know how long we have, right? So living our stories so that if tomorrow is our last day, that we have been who we want to be, that we're living how we want to live, that we're making relationships how we want to have them, just that awareness. So I think it's kind of for all of us that are at adult age, but I think, as millennials are aging, or or my generation, we're taking more and more care. Well, the older generation is the highest rising population, right? So we're going to have these conversations more and more. And it's across the whole family, with the exception of the younger people, of course. But I even tell stories in my book of very young people. I had a niece die at 5 years old of a brainstem glioma. And her mother said, I thought she was mine, but now I know she was just mine to borrow. Those are things that we all will face in our lives with people we love. Or a 20-something-year-old, well, he was 22, but he was the #1 tennis player in the entire country. I mean, he had a bright future, lived well known. He died of a cancer as well. And his mother said on his death, I prayed for a miracle, and then I realized he was the miracle. So our stories of how other people, have gotten through these things, and who we show up to be in that same situation, that this is life. And as hard as it is, and this loss and this grief and illness, that's all difficult. It is not fun to go through, but it is a natural part of life. So we'll all have to have those conversations with our own family. And I think to have put some thought and put some awareness ahead of time will take away the impact of, I never thought I would be here, and I shouldn't be here in this conversation. Because yes, you will be there, and you're supposed to be there. It is life. So I guess whoever's ready and brave enough to start having these conversations, and there's peace again with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In fact, just before we started, you had a conversation with somebody else, and the value of having exploratory conversations.
Yes.
What's your vision look like, and what do you see as part of that? And if you could write your script now, which you can, then how would the end look? And I find myself having those kinds of conversations more and more. I've got a series of professional development workshops going on now for a community which has been very hard hit by COVID. And so people of all ages, cross generations have either experienced COVID or had a family member close to them lost due to COVID. And so I think the whole grappling with grief and loss are hitting people very differently in ways that maybe some of our younger generations wouldn't normally, and they've had to face things. And I mentioned this morning in a workshop that the longer this goes on, the closer and closer it gets in terms of knowing people who have lost their lives to COVID. And certainly that happened for me just less than a month ago with a family very close to me who lost the grandfather who I've known for 25 years. And so, yeah, and so it's tough, and it brings about a lot of reflection and so forth. If when you think about your book, and I know that you've got a workbook that goes with it and things like that, describe a little bit more about what people gain and how they can benefit from working through the workbook that goes with your book.
So I do have a free PDF on my website, which is bestconflictsolutions.com. And it's for group study. It's been used in churches, women's groups, whatever, that goes chapter by chapter. And you can talk about and design what you want based on answering some hard questions and imagining a future that could potentially be real, and what do you want to leave, and who do you want to be? And when I say what do you want to leave, I'm not talking about will stuff. I'm talking about the experiences with the people that you love. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about your own quality of life. Just to start having those conversations in groups, which is a great way to do it. I've hosted them online, and it's just incredible when people can talk about the things that have been difficult to talk, what opens up, what comes out. And an interesting word is people age, they need to talk about these things, and they know it. So I've seen people who are older try to talk to their adult children and say, hey, I have this illness, we need to talk about this. Oh, no, we can't talk about that. We can't pretend this is not going to happen. It'll be okay to talk about it. And that's what mediators do, right? Help you use the facilitating dialogue. A lot of time that's what it comes to. The word mediation being something that goes beyond a legal term of going into mediation. It is helping people have difficult conversations.
Absolutely, yes. What I like to call it instead, because we have a natural reaction to words, and so difficult people like, and so different kinds of conversations, that may sometimes be difficult.
Or challenging conversations. Yes, I learned that from you, actually, to change that word. And that's exactly right. That was a great lesson, to use challenging instead of difficult.
Yeah. Because we tend to rise up to the challenges.
That's
when
right.
we talk about difficulties, we want to retreat. And so
that's exactly right.
Yeah, so it's about how to open up the mind. Yes. And so when you think about, our world of mediation and maybe lawyer advocates, those who mediate, those who facilitate, how might that community of professionals use this book in a way that would be meaningful to their clients?
I think definitely in elder law attorneys, there is, elder mediation is still relatively unknown, that you can have mediators that are specific to these decisions, even around hospice and who to choose. And we still think of it more in the legal sense. And so I think, estate attorneys, estate law, family, even in some cases. And for me, part of my passion around mediation is to normalize it. You're a psychologist, you're a counselor. So people ask me very often, what's the difference between what I do and what a counselor does? And I think one thing is, while we have to acknowledge the past and what the problems are, that mediation or conflict coaching is more forward. It's more systems planning. It's more progressive. We acknowledge what the past has been, but we don't spend a lot of time there. How did we get there? We spend more time designing a future that will be better. And so it's kind of more proactive in that sense.
Yes, I use exactly that kind of phraseology as well. As in, oftentimes therapy is based more on a medical model of diagnosing what's wrong. And that's not where we need to be. And when we come to these kinds of things, counseling's a little bit more, present and future focused, but coaching really makes the shift. And then certainly mediation helps design the plan among multiple parties. And so I always like to say we need to just understand the past long enough to recognize the impact on our present, so we can make informed decisions about how to move forward in the future. And that's really what it sounds like you are as far as writing that final chapter. I know I've read through your book, and it's absolutely marvelous, some great gems, some great insights. And again, we have, death is part of living, it's part of our human experience. And so being better prepared and planning for it makes all the sense. I also like to say, uncertainty, unpredictability, unexpectedness create instability. And when we feel unstable, we feel anxious, and therefore we don't tend to trust. And when we're in that state of mind, we're not in a good decision-making perspective. And so what you're talking about then is really about gaining knowledge about how to plan for that and take some of the question marks out of it. And I think I've shared with you before, Kimberly, my second oldest brother went through an experience of cancer as well. And had two marriages, still had a business where his ex-wife was involved. Now he has adult children, and he was already trying to move out of the business to take more of a back seat. And then, okay, who's going to take over the business? Well, the daughter did step up. But then as he became ill with cancer, and I had my sister from Florida call me, Debra, you have to go to Minnesota. You have to help them figure this out because nobody knows what's going on. Nobody's talking. And so so I did something I wouldn't normally recommend. I mediated my own family issues, but I was not part of the issues. So I felt comfortable doing that. And I was very clear with them is that this is what I do and this is how I can help. but there are some rules of engagement, and so guided them through that, wrote out some agreements. And so he was able to spend his last 14 months or so of life, feeling very comfortable. His wife knew exactly, they knew where the business was going, and his wishes were honored in terms of how he wanted to see his celebration. So it was powerful when it comes to the mediation experience. So
that was beautiful. That was beautiful. And that's exactly what I've seen if we go through the process. I had a client recently who died, and we went through that exact process. And, having put into place the steps for that as his illness was progressing, even once he got to hospice, he was telling jokes, and the family was laughing. And I left them going, that couldn't have happened if they weren't prepared. But when he finally died, I still check in with his wife from time to time. And she said, I don't feel grief the way I thought I would. They had a long marriage, and I really believe it's because of the preparation. Mm-hmm. Of course, the diagnosis was a surprise to them. Nobody's expecting that first diagnosis, but working through that with planning, okay, how are we going to handle that next? And being intentional, and how much, they knew how much actual hope there was for treatment, which in his case was very little. So they decided not to do things that would maybe take away his quality of life, just to extend his life, and really had that peace that you used the word of afterwards. We're fighting the inevitable all the way to the end sometimes. And then we're exhausted and looking for blame and exasperated. When we can accept that this is part of life, everything you said is just spot on. We can make decisions on, okay, what's our best next?
Yeah. And, I'll share with you, building on that, because again, I come from a large family, so I've lost quite a few siblings already. And the first sibling I lost actually was sort of in the opposite situation of what my next brother did. And so that there hadn't been communication. He was divorced. His surviving nearly adult children didn't have knowledge. That nobody had knowledge of sort of what his affairs were, and et cetera. And so it was really a bewildering, confusing time afterwards to sort through everything and to, get things in place. And sometimes efforts were duplicated. Sometimes, things that should have been attended to got overlooked. And so I just share that, having been through that, how important it is to develop that plan, that map out that story, to get some assistance. It was facilitating that dialogue among family members is so critically important.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, kind of your ending. One client told me, that their ending, how they did their ending, would be how they were remembered. Yeah. Like this matters so much. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kimberly, it's been absolutely delightful having you here to talk about such a very important topic, because it is something we all face, sometimes over and over again. And it sounds like your book, and I know your book is a real inspiration to how people can look at what inevitably will happen. And so if there's a couple of final words that you'd like to impart to our viewers and listeners, what might that be?
Well, I want to thank you for having me here. And, I just, I guess I want to thank everyone for, after having been through this past year altogether, we have connected more in places like this. We have risen to a hard calling, and I think, we can continue to do that. So I just want to thank everyone for their time. And, I live with, because of knowing that life can be over in a moment for all the people I've seen died, I live in the mantra that every moment matters. Every interaction that we have matters. And so I want to thank you all for choosing that moment to be here with us today.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Yes. Yeah. Be grateful for what you have today, because in a moment, things can change. Yes. Yeah. So thank you again to our listeners and viewers for joining us on the DCM podcast, Decoding the Conflict Mindset, because conflict comes up in all kinds of levels. And so we need to have the skills, abilities, knowledge, and insight on how to manage that differently. We want to bring you some of the up-and-coming best of what's out there, thought leaders to shape new worlds of thinking and how we approach life, resolving disputes in the world, your community, and in your family of origin, whatever level that might be. And so the goal is to bring you insights into how you view conflict. And again, it's not that conflict's bad, it's how you manage it. And so that you can make a difference in your life and in the lives of others, personally, professionally, and also be aware of the different pathways available to you in resolving conflict. And so, yes, the world is different now. Are you ready? So if you enjoyed what you got today, then please do subscribe so you can get notified of the next interesting podcast coming your way. And again, Kimberly, you've been absolutely delightful, so thank you. And for our viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed what you have, please post on Facebook and social media, LinkedIn, so that others can learn about this program and learn from the insights, knowledge, and experience of Kimberly Best, our guest speaker for today. I'm excited to bring to you our next guest. We have yet another unique perspective on families and conflict. Our next guest will be Richard Ludinger. And Richard comes with extensive international experience working in business, largely around mergers and acquisitions. So he is really key to talking about family businesses and the unique challenges and conflicts that come up with families in business. So you don't want to miss out. Please join us for our next episode with Richard Ludinger, family-owned business conflict specialist. Something to be learned.